Jono, how are we doing?
Matt, good mate, as always, good to be here.
Calling us from sunny Australia. We're very jealous and envious. We've got full blown on winter here. But right, and I've got a conference this week. My idea of hell. Australia. We're going to talk about Australia. We're going to talk about energy. We're going to talk about your politicians because it's just too much fun not to. But first, let's start with a little bit international. We obviously COP29 in Baku, raging success. Do you agree?
Not as an Australian. No, no.
So.
I think there's a good bunch of Australia that thinks that we're embarrassed by our government at COP29. We obviously signed up some renewables agreements and everything else like that. Fantastic. But we also announced that we were not going to participate in the new Gen 4 International Forum agreement that comes online in March next year. People probably don't know that Australia has been a full member of that alliance, even though we don't have a civilian nuclear industry. We've been a valued participant since about 2016, 2017. The UK government put out a press release they said Australia was expected to join the new agreement, and then the UK government was forced to retract it because our energy minister said no, we won't be signing that. We won't be rolling over our participation. We do have some disagreement in our media whether we're pulling out of the agreement or, because obviously pulling out an agreement doesn't sound good. So they're saying, oh, no, we're not pulling out of the existing agreement. We're just not going to do the new one.
You're not upgrading your phone. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe that's fine. Should we explain what the Gen 4 International Forum is and what was it and what is it moving to?
Yeah, so it has been a research and development forum focused on advanced reactor technologies, and some of those are power reactors or reactors for industrial heat, for example. Australia first signed up in 2016, 2017 with Malcolm Turnbull, again, before we ever intended on building reactors. So it's, it's simply an R&D thing. The new agreement will look to improve commercialization of SMRs and Gen 4 reactors. So to keep going down that route, but obviously still with a heavy R&D focus to it.
So what's Australia going to do instead? Why is Chris Bowen, your lovely energy minister, so anti-nuclear, anti-anything?
It's an embarrassment. But I've been a bit vocal on Twitter, as I tend to be, Matt. I think I called it a burning the books moment, where we are being told what to do research and develop, what to be involved in, what not to be involved in, and if it doesn't meet our government's ideological desires, then we're not going to be involved. And without jumping to something else that's happened in Australia, our government recently tried to legislate what was information and what was misinformation in this country. And including, by the way, giving them an out by saying anything they said was not misinformation because it was said by the government, so it must be true. Thankfully, our upper house of our parliament was sensible enough to shoot that down recently. So what are we going to be doing instead? We're going to be building more renewables. Matt, more? Yep. Super. That's going really well for us because even this week, so we're in November. It was November. We just rolled in December. It's not yet that hot in Australia. It's getting there. We had a couple of days in New South Wales where things got a little bit hot and, the grid couldn't cope with it. The grid, we had blackouts and we had the New South Wales Premier telling Sydney-siders to not use their dishwashers and to turn down their air conditioners because the grid was in dire straits. Now, Sydney's a freaking international city. We are a first world country. That's kind of not good enough. The energy minister, Mr. Bowen, he's my favourite friend, was very quick to say, this was because there were a couple of coal plants, bad, unreliable coal plants were offline at the time, refusing to suggest it had anything to do with the vast amount of intermittent renewables that can't be relied on a firm basis. And therefore, that was the issue for why there would be underinvestment in maintenance of the coal plants.
So what's Australia do? We should obviously mention that the Aussies pulled out, but others jumped in. I mean, I think
six more countries signed up to the Triple Nuclear Pledge. Now, what was interesting about those six and let me get my notes here: Kazakhstan, Kenya, Kosovo, Nigeria, El Salvador, Turkey. Not exactly the who's who of the first world. You're starting to see the nuclear pledge and the nuclear desire really trickle down to some of those other economies. And if you go to, stand up in a engineering class at university in Australia and say, do you think Australian engineers that you are less capable than engineers in Kenya or Kosovo or Nigeria or El Salvador? What do you think they'll say? Do you think Australia can build reactors or not? It's this whole "we can't do it in Australia" thing is doesn't really pass the pub test.
Yeah, it's not good. Look, they want sort of maybe some of the more advanced countries in the world, but Australia it was more populous. Nigeria, 220, 230 million, Turkey, 85, 90 million. That sort of, they need solutions, and they, as not very advanced countries, have come down to the energy efficiency of nuclear, probably in the shape of SMRs, where Australia is not. So where does this end up? I mean, when you've got an election next year, haven't you? General election?
We do sometime. Not yet called, but it'll be before May.
Right.
And one of the things that if there is a change in government, this COP29 agreement is something that would be a very quick demonstration of something that the opposition, if they were successful in their pro-nuclear policy, they would step back in. It would be in that agreement quicker than there are a few things that they could do to demonstrate progress. So we'll keep an eye on this one.
Right. Okay. And I think you sent me something over before we started talking was about the economic complexity index rankings.
Yeah.
Not easy to say. What is it, and what can you tell us?
Yeah. So the economic complexity index is rankings put together by Harvard about how complicated the products that you provide as an economy to the global market. Now, Australia's never been that great at this because we export a lot of raw materials, not much manufacturing. But so we were, 20 years ago, we were ranked 60 in the world out of 145. So not that good. This year, we've slipped to 102nd. Now, that is on the back of our manufacturing industries just collapsing. And what's driving that? Well, driving that is a lack of competitiveness, one of which is due to high energy prices. Australia used to have some of the cheapest electricity in the world, where we burned our own coal, and we had large investment in baseload coal. Fast forward 20 years, and that's not the case. We've got some of the most expensive energy prices in the world here in Australia. I think the UK is still ahead of us, but we're catching up.
Yeah, that's a race we don't really want to be in, quite frankly. But there we go. We are both equally hampered.
And so let me give you some examples of this.
Yeah.
Right. So recently, there's a company called Tomago Aluminium. It's a subsidiary of Rio Tinto. They are one of the biggest energy producers energy users in Australia. They account for literally about 10% of the entire New South Wales grid. Tomago is now looking like they're going to have to shut down their operations because they cannot. They went out a few months ago championing their net zero by 2030 targets. They went out in big fanfare for I think was the biggest renewable energy EOI in Australian history. Literally 3 months later, they've come back and said, there is just not enough renewable energy available at a reasonable price. It is not feasible for us, full stop. And they're having to go back and reassess. And one of their questions is, can we keep this operational? Again, the largest user of energy in New South Wales.
I find this quite disturbing because we saw similar things here in Germany, in Europe, specifically Germany, where obviously when we first, with the Ukraine situation, Russia, Ukraine situation, Nord Stream 2, and all that wonderful kind of gas ecosystems during COVID times as well, it drove the energy prices up in Germany, trebled, and we were finding that industry there was struggling to keep the doors open. Okay, so that was the first kind of problem, and that was outside of their control. You could argue. The thing that's in their control, and what I see here with Tomoco, is the marketing department driving the company. It seems we're going to be net zero by 2030 without actually thinking, can we? Do you know what I mean? And we're seeing that across the globe. It's nuts. So we've got cars switching to 100% battery without thinking through, well, where do I get these minerals from to be able to build this stuff? Where's the energy coming from? Where's the infrastructure to, get the energy to where it needs to be? It feels like madness at the moment. There's not, you talk about energy transition, but there sort of needs to be a sort of a transition, a kind of thought through transition. How long is this actually realistically going to take? And let's come up with a plan for that. Setting up 2025 and 2030 is insane. So, well done Australia, but well done the rest of the world too.
Well, and what you're going to see in Australia, and you've already started to see it. So supposedly, all our coal plants are coming offline quite quickly. Now, I know the UK's already got your last coal out. You've still got baseload from nuclear. You've also got the ability to import a whole shitload of energy from Europe. We don't. So all our coal plants are apparently coming offline, and they're coming offline quickly because they can't make money, because they can only operate in the peaks of demand, and coal plants don't do that very well, and there's not a price mechanism in place to make that economic. But the government has now had to spend hundreds of millions of dollars extending the life of New South Wales' largest coal plant by 2 years. $400 million from memory, because the coal plant, on a per megawatt hour basis, it's going to be extremely expensive, but they've got no other choice. And what you expect, we expect to see is, I think coal will end up hanging in for a lot longer, because, they're not just going to, there's no choice to it. Without it, the system reliability you go to put, they haven't built enough new gas generation. Australia's, you wouldn't believe this with the amount of gas we've got in this country. We've actually got a gas shortage in Australia now, which is bizarre.
Yeah. Well done.
Plenty of gas in the ground. Victoria's like full of gas, just not allowed to mine it. Crazy. And so we're now going to be importing gas to meet our our gas peaking requirements for generation. It's an absolute mess. So that's all subject, obviously, to there not being a change of government next year. If there is, you'll probably see a bit of a reset, and probably the wisest thing you could do is just hit the pause button for a few months to give time for a proper review and some recommendations once a new government is in power.
But do you think the insanity is over? And again, I'm going to go back to my rant earlier, because about marketing departments coming up with a new way of selling the dream without thinking, can the business actually sustain this? Is it economic? Is it realistic? You've got your big sort of 800-pound gorilla in the room, Andrew Forrest, obviously was very, very vocal, standing for many conferences. Was showing off, quite frankly, what he was going to be doing. And I think is he still as confident?
No. So I mean, Andrew, number one, is a master at marketing. So that man can sell ice to the Eskimos. What he did is sell green hydrogen to the federal government. So, he sold the plan of it. So it was really off the back of Andrew's support that the government put in place a massive green hydrogen energy export superpower scenario, where Australia is going to be the home to the world's largest green energy, green hydrogen export business. And there was a lot of subsidies involved in that. And sort of a couple of months ago, Andrew just pulled the ripcord on that and said, "Oh yeah, the 2030 targets that I sort of had in place are not achievable." And he's still a very big believer in decarbonising his company's Fortescue Metals, decarbonising their operations. They're doing a lot of work in electric haulage and electrification of trains and all sorts of stuff. But particularly, specifically with green hydrogen, he walked that back. That was at a time when Woodside, another one of our big oil and gas producers, has walked away from their green hydrogen hub in Bell Bay in Tasmania, again, despite receiving crap loads of federal government subsidies. And I think we've recently also had Kansai Electric, which is the Japanese pullout of a huge green hydrogen project called CQH2 in Queensland. And again, the federal government had funded a whole chunk of their BFS, amongst other things, and concessional finance and everything to get that thing up. And Kansai Electric's gone, you know what? Something doesn't stack up. So yeah, not all is smooth in the energy transition in Australia. I'm not saying it is anywhere, but I think we really swallowed hook, line, and sinker the idealism of the green economy.
And we pay for it.
And we swallowed it a lot, and I think we're about to have a bit of a reaction. Unpleasant reaction.
With the election. We'll see where the general election gets you guys next year. I don't think it's going to be pretty. We just saw a whole sea change over here reacting to the previous government. And this one seems to have walked in and sort of picked up where the last one left off. Equally dumb decisions with our tax money. So some of these funds and subsidies, though, like say, that's what we all need to remember here. That politicians, in your case, you talk about Chris Bowen a lot. He's not making these decisions in isolation. It's not, the whole party has bought into an ethos and is spending money and dishing out these subsidies to companies without a kind of, a holistic, well thought through plan. And it kind of reminds me of a conversation I had with a friend of mine who advises the UK government, his consultancy does, and he personally does, as well as the French government, etc. He was saying, this might have been over a glass of wine or two, but the bottom line is they lay out the plans for the governments and say these are the most efficient ways to do it. This is the best use of spend, to get what you want. And the government politicizes it. They make decisions based on, well, look, we've got to think about job creation in certain parts of the country, which may not be the best place to put this stuff, and that goes from energy creation to carbon sequestration. And, I think that his concerns that carbon sequestration is just nuts.
Yeah, we don't do a lot of that.
Play for itself.
We don't do a lot of that in Australia. But I think another, a demonstration of that Australianised would be the impact of rooftop solar that we have in our grid over here. We hear a lot that Australia is the sunniest country in the world. It is, but the sun still goes down. And we have had for a long time bipartisan support for massive rooftop solar subsidies. And that has created this huge distortion in the market for rooftop solar. And I know I would compare rooftop solar here to grid scale solar. And so I'm not saying solar generally, I'm just saying that the price signals that the rooftop solar subsidies have been creating are all wrong for our grid. So there's been massive overbuild of rooftop solar. And for people who don't know my views on rooftop, look, it's such a very nice thing to think about for people to think that they're doing their bit, but it's generally massively inefficient. You've got small scale installations. Those installations are on people's roofs. It's hard to get to and expensive. You need a lot of metal. They're often poorly aligned because they've got to sit with existing roof lines. There's shading issues. And actually with export of excess solar, rooftop solar into the grid, you're suddenly doing a push of power in a direction which was not originally intended. It creates all sorts of issues. So rooftop solar versus grid scale solar,
no competition. It's no competition. It's job creation again. I mean, the whole again, it's like it's a green dream, right? It's highly inefficient. Ends up costing you more money, and all the problems that comes with someone stomping around on your roof. But it's gainful employment for the consultancies and marketing teams selling that to you. the installation people putting it on your roof, the maintenance of those things, and yeah, you feel warm and fuzzy inside, but wonder
Yeah.
why your energy bills are quite
Well,
high.
it's funny though. It's a massive sort of wealth transfer from people who can't afford it to people who can afford it because of those subsidies. The value of those subsidies being given to people is extraordinarily high. And you know the socialists out there probably haven't worked that out yet. That they are literally robbing the poor to pay the rich, and it's the poor that are suffering through higher network charges as a result. So I'm a big believer that we need to reset the price signals that the market's getting from rooftop solar. What does that mean? Probably means reducing those subsidies. You know what? Grandfather in. If you want, grandfather in everyone that has invested already, so they don't feel aggrieved, but just slow down the growth in that industry, and as our entire energy grid gets bigger, the proportion of rooftop solar will come off and be less of a problem for us.
Well, the good news is we're still going to be able to broadcast our next show because the Senate's finally killed off the misinformation bill in Australia, where the government gets to decide what is and is not relevant information for us to consume. So that there's an upside. Tell us more about that.
So this misinformation bill, look, rumour around town is that our Prime Minister, Mr. Albanese, has a bit of a soft skin. Albo meme easy is the most memed politician in Australian history, and he doesn't like it. So the misinformation bill was proposed there to counter misinformation, including memes on the internet, for God's sake. Yet there was an out that anything that the government said could not be misinformation. Now, what was happening at the time is obviously the Liberal opposition has announced a pro-nuclear policy. We had government ministers, literally government ministers, putting out all sorts of misleading shit around the nuclear industry. Not only Simpsons memes, but stuff designed to scare people. For example, suggesting that a 4.1 magnitude earthquake, which is kind of like a ripple, is actually a safety issue for a nuclear plant. Now, all these things and these ridiculous memes about family dogs turning into troglodytes because of the radiation would, if anyone else said them, could have been misinformation. But hey, because the government ministers were saying it, that couldn't be misinformation, could it? So no, the Australian Senate, our upper house, banded together and killed that off a few days ago. So that was a good outcome. The government also failed on its nature positive reforms, which were the nicely named, good marketing, but reforms to federal environmental protection legislation. They got canned. Very cleverly, the Prime Minister has listened to Western Australia, the biggest mining state there. Western Australia is massively concerned about that. Government realises they need WA votes, so they've listened. So another failure there. They did get through their social media ban for under 16s, which a bit of a controversial thing. World first. No one's quite sure how they'll enforce that one.
What do you mean social media? No social media for under 16-year-olds?
Not quite. No designated, specified social media. So literally the legislation, which will come into effect next year, names specific services: Snapchat, Facebook, Insta. Curiously enough, YouTube is counted as a social media platform, which our teenagers will no longer be able to access. Now, I mention YouTube because there was a hilarious conversation between our parliamentarians in debate on this, where YouTube as a video sharing service is subject to the ban. As a 16-year-old in Australia, you won't be able to access it. But Pornhub, another video sharing service, not subject to the ban. So, 15-year-olds in Australia have access to Pornhub, but not YouTube. It's a crazy, crazy piece of legislation, I think. And more so, the issue is not with trying to protect our kids from the online harm of social media. People understand that. The issue is, how do you enforce that? And so far, the legislation, whilst it's banned, it doesn't actually say how you're going to enforce it. So far, the only thing people can come up with is that, well, people over age 16 will have to prove their identity to use social media. And that's kind of where the rub is. Right?
Oh, dear. Oh, dear.
To solve that problem, you could cause so libertarians and the like are all off on that. So who knows how that's going to actually be enforced, but it comes into effect next year in Australia.
I think that's a tough one because everyone's going to have an example at either extreme of that argument, right? And depending on where the media decide the most advertising sales will be made, I guess they'll pick a side. I think that's a rocky road. You talk about branding books earlier. I think this is branding books territory here.
Books that come to,
not quite 1933, but not far off. Right. Well, crikey, keep us up to date on that one. I think that's pretty bad news for Australia, and something that we'd seen starting up across Europe. We in the UK are, we've definitely got something similar to that, where people are being arrested because of showing their opinions on social media, and I think that is a step too far. Absolutely. Right, but we better move on to other things. In terms of the world of Aussie politics, because wow, you guys are knocking it out of the park. Yeah. Come on, okay. Now the other bright idea that the politicians have come up with this. Let's go and raid the piggy bank.
Yes. Okay, so Australia has a sovereign wealth fund that's called the Future Fund. It was created a while ago. The government injected $60 billion in it. That $60 billion has now grown with investment returns to $230 billion, I think it is. So good performance. What our treasurer, Mr. Jim Chalmers is his name, has cooked up. I actually put out a meme on Twitter about him cooking the books on this. Is that he would rewrite the fund's investment mandate to require it to invest in investments that are consistent with government policy, specifically housing, and we've got a housing shortage in Australia, and renewable energy projects. Now, the corollary to that was but it can't impact with the fund's requirement to maximise returns for its shareholders, being the government. Now, you say that all you want, but the flip side of that is that does not pass a pub test. We're seeing concern about returns for renewable energy in Australia if subsidies are removed. The government has put in this thing called capacity investment schemes, underwrite returns, and essentially provide risk-free returns to developers. All these things to try and pick up the pace on, what some might call a stalled energy transition.
Yeah, that's pretty dodgy in the sense that this government will have policies which are not quite the same as the next government, but the next government will say, but we've got precedent here. Let's go raid this piggy bank, which is again dangerous territory. It means that people have run out of ideas, and also government spending money which they shouldn't be spending. On things we never asked for, quite frankly. But we're going to turn into those two grumpy old men on the Muppets.
Well, so you have just raised government spending. Now, we've talked about this a lot before, but Australia has a government spending problem. Now, what we don't have is DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, like Mr. Trump is putting in the US. What we do have is a government that is at war with our own Reserve Bank, our central bank, where the central bank has said the reason why Australian inflation is so stubbornly high and therefore eroding Australian standard of living is government spending, and the treasurer,
our money. Just
the treasurer
at spending our money. Say it out loud, folks.
Yeah, and the treasurer is saying, no, Reserve Bank, you're wrong. Yeah. I mean, it's been an absolute cluster of policy loggerheads there. Australia has suffered. There are charts out there. Australia has suffered the largest decline in real standard of living of any member of the OECD in the last few years since Mr. Albanese came to power.
Yeah, spending money for fun, spending money that's not his on things which he's not mandated to do, just to try and stay in power. I think there's a lot of politicians fall into that category. And again, we better stay away from that, or we will be ranting all day with examples. And I'm sure everyone listening into this feels the same way too. If they don't, they should probably have a think about that one. The other thing, we better get on to a few more things, uranium and nuclear focused. Now, you've been sort of trotting around Oz. I think you were saying before we started. What's the news over there on the nuclear
So I
front?
spent some time volunteering some time with an organisation called Nuclear for Australia, which is a not-for-profit, actually meant to be bipartisan action group looking to provide information to communities about nuclear energy. It was founded by a young chap called Will Shackle, who founded the organisation when he was 16. He's now 18. It's funny, he just finished his high school exams. All the rest of his school are up going to schoolies, which are basically getting drunk on the Gold Coast. Will was coming with me up to a community event for nuclear energy. Just such a motivated young man. He's very impressive. So we've been going around Australia. I don't do all the events, but I do them when I can, to talk to communities and provide information around just questions on nuclear energy and getting through some of that misinformation that gets out through our politicians and Simpsons memes and the like. I always take the opportunity to talk about uranium mining as well in that. And look, the other day, the biggest crowd, the biggest response I got, the crowd erupted when I said, you know what, we're up in Queensland, we're also going to remove the uranium mining ban that you have here in Queensland. And that was, to raucous applause. So I think, the level, the amount of community wanting to listen and cut through the bullshit, I think is great. Obviously any crowd that comes to one of those events, there may be some self-selection bias in that. But afterwards I've had people come up and say, look, I was anti to start with, and at least you made me think about some stuff. I'm going to go away and do more research. Now that is the best outcome. Absolutely. The best outcome we can have, and that's happening a lot. So it's fantastic. Similarly with uranium mining, I think the support in the community to overturn bans we have in Queensland and WA is coming along in leaps and bounds. And I'm particularly vocal about that.
And it's nice to see, kids like that driven because they think it's important. I mean, obviously he'll do very well in life as
kids going to be prime minister one day,
like that.
Home, no doubt.
Yeah, it's phenomenal and nice to see. And when you then one hand talk about banning kids on social media in one conversation, and then saying, well, actually, kids can actually do okay on their hand.
That's a really interesting point. And Will, in particular, has been particularly vocal. Whilst his advocacy group was all around nuclear energy, he obviously felt the need to speak out on social media things on that ban, and he's been very vocal about it. Yeah.
Which way?
Yeah.
Which side of the argument?
Yeah, anti-ban.
Of course.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Sensible. Crikey. I honestly, sometimes these politicians perhaps have been in politics too long and they've kind of forgot what it's all about.
Yeah. So,
we the people.
For example, just to keep on this for 1 second,
Sure.
as a young man there, he sat before a federal parliamentary inquiry 2 weeks ago up in Brisbane to talk about the federal ban and possibly overturning it. We've got the parliamentary inquiries going around Australia at the moment with community. You can go and if you get selected, you can go and speak. I've actually been selected to go and speak in Sydney in a couple of weeks to give evidence before Parliament. Never done anything like that before, face to face. Will went in there as the head of Nuclear for Australia, but also as an 18-year-old and representing the views of his generation. It was really impressive. And I think this parliamentary inquiry it was called by Albanese as a bit of a political move to try and catch the pro-nuclear brigade off guard and provide a report just before an election. Man, I think it's sort of turned into something that he did not expect. So there's hours of great watching on YouTube if you want to watch it.
I will absolutely go and do that. And John, but we're going to have to cut it short here because I
Yeah.
need to dash off, and so do you. As ever, fascinating insight into the world of Aussie politics, how it affects energy more broadly, and obviously we always like to bring it back to the nuclear and uranium side of things. How are you guys getting on?
Yeah, so just quickly, on Cauldron, we have just finished up for the year drilling for our campaign. It's just getting too damn hot up in the Pilbara where we are, in the Ashburton. So we've got crews demobilising. We're going to have a lot more data and analysis to be doing over the coming months, which I hope to see nice things like resource upgrades and things like that. So we're pretty happy with the amount of uranium we found. It's a lot out there, and that's helping to support increased advocacy in the uranium market in WA amongst industry there. And we'll be back drilling, late March, early April, I guess, is when it gets cool enough in there to go back out. So we've got a lot of work to do in the intervening period, but fantastic. And come and give us a follow on Twitter at CXUASX for all my latest info.
Johnny, appreciate your time today, mate. See you soon.
Awesome, Matt. Cheers.